Welcome to Behind the Citgo, where we pull back the curtain on the unseen truth of addiction recovery and talk about things most people never get a chance to see. I'm your host, Josh Torbich. Each week, we're sitting down with people who lived it, led it, and are still learning from it today. This isn't polished, it's real, it's raw, and it's noted in the faith and hope because we do recover. So whether you're in recovery, walking alongside someone who is, or just trying to understand what healing really looks like, you came to the right place. Let's dig in. Hey everyone, welcome back. Another episode Behind the Citgo. I'm Josh Torbich, your host. Really grateful to be here today with one of, hey, I say this about a lot of people. They're my dear friends. This one's a dear, dear friend. Yeah?
Thank you.
Eric Machado.
Yes.
Been riding or dying with Eric since 2017. We've had a relationship. I've seen him in the best of times. I've seen him in the worst of times. Right now, what you're looking at, folks, the best I've ever seen him. Look at him. Tell him, Machado, strong jawline, natural tan going on.
I'm a little overweight right
at the
now.
time.
I'd like to be a little lighter.
I like to be a little lighter. You look good though, brother.
Thank you.
Hey, I'll tell you this: sobriety and recovery look well on you.
I appreciate
You look
that.
good. Yeah,
I feel good.
So he's Eric, currently the assistant director of our men's program. Also a very proud graduate of Christian Recovery Centers, Grants Harbor. And actually, one of the cool things we'll flesh out today in the conversation is taking the second swipe at it. But today, the topic, big book fan over here. I got sober through Alcoholics Anonymous. We're talking about step 4.
Yep.
Today's step 4 is all the buzz, what it looks like to make a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. First question right off the rip, why fearless? When the AA folks, when the AA kings, Bill Wilson himself, structured this step in step 4, why add the word fearless when he says make a searching and fearless moral inventory?
I think that's one of the, when people are struggling with making this inventory, I think that's one of the fears is, digging deep and not knowing what you're going to find out about yourself and I think that's where the fear comes from, is that going in blind, writing everything down on a paper and seeing what comes out.
Yeah, there's definitely in the inventory piece when you're trying to look at the stock and trade piece. Do you remember your step 4 really well, really vividly from this last go around at the 12 steps?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes. What are some of the components that you kind of thought were you were more keen on the process this time just because you had started to dabble in them before?
Yeah.
But what are some of the things that really stood out for you as you trickled into that process this last time?
Well, one thing that I noticed was a lot of them were, once they got down on paper and I talked, to my sponsor about it, they seemed kind of silly. And, stuff that really controls your brain and rents that much space in your head, you get it down on paper and you're like, wow, I'm glad to let that go. And I've heard it's really 95% of what's on the paper is hiding that 5% that's really, really making you, renting that much space and making you not ready to let go and, accept God's thinking.
Well, yeah, when you watch them and you first start to frame up in this step process, it brings you to that space where it has you list your resentments and it has you categorize them essentially inside of, and this is for anyone else who's in a different fellowship. Machado had the world's greatest sponsor who took him through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Machado, who's the world's greatest sponsor?
His name was Josh Torbich.
Boom!
There
it is.
Yes.
See, I knew you were going to say that. I framed it up perfectly. No, so I had the privilege of taking Machado through 12 steps a year and a half ago or so, whenever he had just completed the program and signed on to roll into working for the ministry after that. And when you're first, so this is the version of Alcoholics Anonymous from the big book, but when you step into that space, you start to see, okay, we've made a decision of all of the folks who had wronged us. So we made this list, started to list them out on paper, and it wanted us to give them this framework. The cause, so a short sentence, don't build a case, but the cause that they had harmed us, and then the effects. So there's certain things that it affected. But you got to be careful because when you step into that, the resentments, inventory, you get to quickly say, well, if I stop here, I've pretty much only made a list of everyone who owes me an apology. Most people will get sicker after that.
Pretty much.
But there is a certain space that you have to get through as you go through step 4 about what the difference between the shame that you've experienced for a lot of these things as you progress through the healing part of the relationship aspect, and then responsibility. So I have a responsibility to the people on that list. But there's also a certain amount of shame that I feel about the way I behaved or the way I acted. So how did you find a balance between those two things?
Well, going back as I was, making the list, and going through all that fear and guilt and remorse, and it's kind of just like, hey, I'm sorry for my part in that. And I think a big thing is realizing your part, because I think that's what a lot of us do is when we go through this list, you replay stuff in your head, and every time you replay it, it becomes bigger, and your part becomes smaller. So I think just really, talking to that person face to face, where he's able to recount the situation and what happened, and you kind of remember it a little better. It's really refreshing to get that out and say, hey, you know what? I'm sorry for what I did, my part in this situation. And hearing them say the same thing too is really what it's all about. And my list was, like I said, that 95.5% was a lot of, some were serious situations and some were just like kind of petty, but it is getting rid of that guilt and shame and not holding that anymore. I think that's really important. I think that's what this step's all about. I think this is the first step, the first action step, they say. And, the first time I was going through, by the way, when I chose my sponsor, I said, okay, I have to have somebody that's going to hold me accountable, who has some experience. I can't choose another friend that I'm just hanging out with. And I had to choose somebody with some power.
And ruggedly handsome.
Yes, that too. I think that was very important because, I did spend a lot of time with you.
Yeah, a lot of time. Yeah, I was easy on the eyes through it. But so you're making a great point, though, that a lot of people, I think, go out and they try to find someone. How many times have you heard the guys in the program say this? Well, I need to find someone I can relate to. And you're like, bro, no, the people you've been relating to have been horrible. Right? Mm-hmm. But you say the most important thing when finding the person that you're going to go through the 12 steps with is what?
Somebody that's going to hold you accountable. Somebody that's going to say, hey, listen, call you out on your BS. Mm-hmm. Someone that's going to be like, yeah, you're lying. Or, no, that's not enough. See what you really have inside of you. And really, make the most of the experience. Because if you just fly past the steps and really not give it your all, you're really not going to find the full experience. And so that was my thinking. I have to find someone with experience, and I have to go through it as well. I have to do my part in this whole thing and really, really, do it to the full, take advantage of it. So the first time I went through the steps, I quit on 4 because, I don't want to make this list. Maybe I don't even need this. Maybe I don't even have a problem. Maybe I don't, so I quit on 4, and a lot of people quit on 4 because it's the first action step. So this time I took it seriously. I think I had a couple pages full of names and situations. So it was really refreshing to get that down. And after 3 is, giving yourself to Christ, finding that higher power. So it's important to get all that inventory out of your head that doesn't belong there, so you could have God's thinking come in. And you're not going to have room for God's thinking until, you get all that worthless stuff you've been holding on to out.
Yeah, it's amazing. When you frame up step 3 for how it leads way into step 4, step 3 being that primary decision step, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Mm-hmm. And it breaks through that idea of a relationship with God, the creator, that's okay to engage him with at the certain level we're at right now. Mm-hmm. And then when you get into step 4, it is the first time that the steps are asking you to do more than just believe. right? Then more than just, okay, I agree to this next thing, or I'm giving this next thing. It's actually asking you to put pen to paper. And I always thought it to be interesting. The first way that you and I framed it up, just like with everybody else, is it talks about resentments. So made a searching and fearless moral inventory. The first thing I asked you was, well, who are you resentful at? And when you go and you make the framework for that, the big book lays it out and says resentment is actually the number one offender. It says that it kills more alcoholics than any other thing.
That's true.
And how many times do we see people who are going to their grave with it?
Yeah.
You know, that they have hard feelings about so many people. And even though, and this is one of my favorite quotes from the big book, it says, even though that they somehow knew they were to blame, they still felt that others were still more to blame. And how many people do we see separated from the idea of they never took an honest inventory? They never took a full, searching, fearless, moral inventory of what was really going on, of what really brought them to the place that they had, their life had been destroyed to that. So you found yourself going into that process and for the first time being challenged to say that I do have to find this balance between shame, responsibility. And then when you're looking at the inventory's real patterns of thinking and reacting and coping, these patterns do somehow, they shape addiction for individuals. They start to talk to them about, how can I recognize that these aren't just things that are happening to me, but these are cycles that I've caught myself in. People would do things that I felt like were wrong, and then I would stay sore at them.
Yep.
And then I would separate myself from them. One of the questions that I guess that leads me into is, on the list, are there any couples that is there anybody that you feel like you can talk about loosely now in a structure of people who landed on the original resentments list that you didn't expect to be there? Don't forget, it's wide open to the public. So you don't want to say anything. You don't want to say anything that's going to put you underwater. Hopefully you're well into the amends process now, though. You've been cleaning up a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I would say, one of them was my younger brother. I held resentments towards him. I feel like he didn't give me a chance or trust me, or he was always the one I could count on to like always give it to me straight. And at one point our relationship was rocky because I expected him to think, he's trustworthy now. Well, I'm a couple years sober. What I did in the past doesn't matter. You shouldn't hold that against me. And I don't feel like he was. I did feel like he was holding that against me and not giving me a chance. And looking back at it now, you can't think that all is forgotten in other people's eyes because it is in your eyes.
That's because one day you woke up and said, I'm going to stop smoking crack Behind the Citgo.
Yeah.
But a lot of people do expect people just to immediately backwash the past 5-6 years of wreckage that they created.
The same with my parents, It's just like, hey, I'm 2 years clean. Why are you knocking on the bathroom door thinking I'm smoking heroin? But it's trauma that they'll never, really fully, forget.
Yeah, it takes a new
and
track
move on
record.
from.
Yeah, it takes a new track record. So when it talks about resentments, it leads way into this. After you go through the resentments list, and I can picture the meeting that we were in going through this, but let me read you an excerpt from it, okay?
Okay.
It says, we went back through our lives. This is directly from the big book. We're on page 65.
Yep.
After you make the resentments list, which is your first inventory, right? When you go through it, it says, we went back through our lives. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty.
Yeah.
When we were finished, we considered the list carefully. The first thing apparent was that the world and its people were often quite wrong. To conclude that other people were wrong were as far as most of us ever got. That's what I said. If you stop here, you better watch out because you're only going to get sicker. All you've done is made a list of everybody who owes you an apology at this point. All right. So you got to be careful. All right. But then it goes on to say the usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us and we continued to stay sore at them.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was remorse, and then we were sore at ourselves. But the more we fought, and this is the thing that really drives it home for me, but the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters seemed to get. As in war, the only victor only the victor only seemed to win. Our moments of triumph were short-lived. When you look at that, okay? When you look at that, I know for me, this thing articulates exactly the space that I was in, that my life cycle was caught up in people offending me feeling some type of way about it, and then continuing to stay sore at them. It was almost like I could not talk to somebody forever just because they had cut me off
Yep.
in line at the grocery store. Like it was like I was looking for a way to keep
And
all of
that's,
those filing
yeah,
cabinets.
you're right. And that's so true. You know, resentment leads to self-resentment, leads to self-pity. And that's where addicts live, right? That's where
That is the space that they live in.
And, you know, that's the cloak that they have on. That's the cape they're wearing. You know, they walk outside every day. All right, what's going to happen to me today?
That's it.
You better feel sorry for me. And, you know, that's unfortunately, you know, it's a whole set of different, you know, mind thinking, whatever you want to call it, to get rid of that and move on from that. But yeah, that's where addicts like to live, is that self-pity.
So when you think about this idea of self-pity, folks trickling into this active inventory that they're trying to create, self-pity can't propel them to the next step. So I want you to think about their inventory more of a tool for self-compassion, not self-pity. So if we challenge this idea that the misconception of the inventory is about beating yourself up, that's not what this is.
Right.
The world is going to be unfair and fair, both at the same time. And it happens to people like that all the time. What did you have to make sure you didn't lose traction on, to make sure you didn't bleed the lines between, it's not supposed to be an exercise of self-pity, but I'm also not supposed to just beat myself down through this process and make myself feel worthless. Did you find a balance in there?
I was. And another thing I did realize is, you know, the causes of all these things and all these situations and all these people, I realized was the main cause was, or how it affected me, was self-esteem. And I think, you know, me actually seeing that and how my self-esteem played into all these situations, I was able to then to realize that and come at it from a different perspective. And it became self-pity to, you know, I have now, this is my issue, my self-esteem. And, you know, how do I go, what do I go from here? And, you know, that was huge in step 4, when I realized that.
Wow. Yeah, so when it goes on to say, it talks about this concept of if we were going to live, we had to teach ourselves to be free of anger.
Right.
And in step 4, it's trying to frame up this idea, and this is one of my favorite comments that it makes. It talks about the grouch and the brainstorm. How many times do we find ourselves as being this person who's a grouch, easily offended by many things, always walking around with the chip on our shoulder, and then brainstorming and replaying that event over and over and over again about why we were justified in being disappointed. So it tells us to turn back to the list. So it frames you up where you make this entire list of people who've wronged you,
Right.
your resentments list. And then it says, now turn back to the list. It holds this key to our future. But it says this text, and I remember sharing this with you. It says, we were prepared to look at this list, the same list of people who had offended us, but from an entirely different angle. Now, I know what an entirely different angle is. An entirely different angle, you're sitting in a courtroom, and the entire role of my life was playing the prosecuting attorney for everyone and everyone in it. I never met anyone that I didn't immediately start keeping the case files on, saying this person needs to pay for what they've done.
Right.
And now the big book is telling me to take all those people that you've been building a case against, and it's telling you to stand up, and you don't get to go to the gallery where all the people in the audience for the courtroom sit. You don't get to go to the judge's seat. You don't get to hop one seat over and be the person who's on trial. You have to get up in order to see it from an entirely different angle, get up from the prosecuting attorney's chair, walk all the way across the courtroom and sit down in the defense attorney's chair.
Mm.
So if you're truly going to be free from the resentments list, it says, what wrong have you done? We came to this conclusion that we had to look at it from an entirely different angle. How difficult was that for you, for the folks who were on your resentments list?
It was difficult. You never want to, especially situations where you're going in thinking one way for so many years, and you're forcing yourself to admit you were wrong, or admit you were actually the problem in this situation. That's huge, and that's for the inventory. It's tough because you have to figure out what's the inventory that I need to get off the shelves. And and it's like you think you leak into, well, if she would have done that, or she didn't do this, and then that bleeds into that thinking, and then you got to catch yourself like, listen, she or nothing else causes you to drink or do drugs. And I think that was huge. They might make us thirsty some of the times, but nothing causes
put
you
the bottle to your lips.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And once you realize that and hold yourself accountable with these steps and that thought process, it kind of clicks. And that's how it did for me anyway. Realizing what you need to take out. I think the big book describes it like as a store.
Yeah.
And it has that kind of helped me,
It does.
frame it up, and what's not selling. And then you think, oh, well, she just doesn't like this thing, but she will next season. But so it's kind of like you have to like talk to yourself and what needs to get out of my head so I can have God's thoughts in my head. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah, it does. It refers to the inventory, as a store that keeps no regular inventory.
Yep.
Often holds on to unsellable goods.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it talks about if being honest about the value of the stock in trade.
Yes.
Somebody who takes a lamp
Right.
and says, well, the lamp's worth $1,000, and then it sits there on the shelf and never sells. Well, no, it's not really worth $1,000.
Exactly.
It's not worth much. And when you look at the things that guys like me and you hold on to, we're holding this bag and we're dragging with it about all of these people that we're having some sort of offense with. And
Yeah.
we're just dragging it with us through life. And somehow we think it's valuable to us. We just can't see that it's holding us down.
And she once she realizes how valuable this is, it's her thinking that doesn't think that's valuable. She's, you try to make up all these things in your head, like just because they don't think it's valuable, they don't see how valuable it is.
Yeah.
It's
funny. Like somehow you've got one up on them.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Oh, they don't realize that this lamp isn't worth that. Mm-hmm. See, I know. Okay.
And you keep it on your shelf.
And you keep it on your shelf and it never sells. So
Right.
This is the coolest part, I think, and one of the most challenging parts at the same time. But it says, when you looked at it from an entirely new perspective, so we're out of the prosecutor's attorney seat.
Mm-hmm.
We walked across the courtroom. We're sitting on the defense attorney seat, which means what? I'm actually starting to build a case for this person.
Right.
And one of the things my sponsor said to me early on was, is just not your action enough to justify why the shape or the current condition of the relationship is the way that it is. And it was like, if you remove the other person's part entirely, would that not be justifiable to why the relationship that you have with them is under duress, or in some sort of distress? And it tells you this when you're looking at people with resentments. We realize that the people who wronged us were perhaps they were spiritually sick. And it says, though we didn't like their symptoms or the way that they disturbed us, and this is one of my favorite parts, they, like ourselves, were sick too. And one of the things that I always had remembered sharing with people is that when picture this, you're at the hospital, you're sitting in the emergency room. You remember me telling you this story? You're sitting in the emergency room and you hear a doctor come out breaking all kinds of confidentiality rules, and he shares with this lady in the ER waiting room, I'm sorry, ma'am, we just got your test results back. You got cancer and you're dying next week. and you go, you leave, you're like, oh my goodness, did you hear what that lady just got told in the ER waiting room? She's only got 1 week to live. You go get in your car and you're driving down the road, and all of a sudden you see this lady come flying past you in a car. She cuts you off. She gives you the middle finger. She yells out the window something to you. Normally, any other day, you would mash on the gas, chase that lady down, yell at her back. But today, your friend wants to get all worked up who's driving, but you look at your friend and you say, what? Whoa, 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 whoa. No. You're going to let her go today. We're going to let this one slide. Why? Because I just heard back there she's dying next week. It was amazing. It was amazing to watch how quickly you can reframe the amount of things that bothered you in life, and just life and people doing what it does, once you reframe the idea that perhaps these people were spiritually sick.
Yeah.
And it says we wouldn't treat sick people that way. What would we do? No, with sick people, we would avoid retaliation or argument at all costs.
Have compassion for them.
Have compassion for them. Say, oh my goodness, they're dying of this. How many people on our resentments list were dying the illness of addiction, just like we were. But yet our harshest judgments seem to frame up and line up directly with them.
That's a different perspective, that's for sure. My first time in the program, I'd get all worked up. And I'd be in the office with Tyler, like, how could this guy just did this and that? And then Tyler just look at me like, bro, he's sick. And I'm just like, what? I've never heard that. Like, I've never heard anybody say that to me before. And bro, he's sick. And then, bro, it kind of just it caught me off guard, and it changed I guess you're right. Like, how can I be mad at him?
Yeah. Yeah. How can you? They're doing what sick people do.
Right. Yeah.
So when you finish up on this resentments leading way into how you come to find out that you've actually played your role in these relationships and ask you those questions, where was I selfish, dishonest, afraid?
Yeah.
So it has you reshape the entire conversation around reanalyzing the resentment in a way that you start owning your part.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that it starts working directly with the people that you feel like owe you an apology. But then it rolls into the other inventory piece, and there's two more inventories of this, but it rolls into the fears part of it. And in big part of step 4 that I know a lot of people have a hard time with is the fears inventory. And as you go into it, you think to yourself, well, I'm not really afraid of anything, until you get real honest about the conversation. Yeah. You start listing out the fears that you have. Do you recall any of the fears that you were wrestling with whenever you were going through your fears inventory process in step 4?
Yeah. Fears of, I don't know if this counts, but it was my fear of like going up to the person, apologizing to them.
Yeah. Knowing that you were preempting having to make matters right. Yeah.
Like my ex-girlfriend, like, how do I do this? I remember asking you, like, what does this even look like? Do I just like write a letter? Do I have to do it face to face? That was my biggest fear, was actually like confronting these things. And facing the truth. And I guess moral comes down to, what does it mean? Truth? And that was kind of like what it really like, because I went into thinking like, okay, I actually have to talk to these people as soon as their name goes down on this paper.
Right.
So it's really, that's the fear, is like, okay, well, I guess I'm doing this.
It's kind of intimidating.
I guess I'm doing this. Like, oh, here's his name.
Because you really don't. I guess I never thought about it before, but I guess every sponsor takes for granted that they know that they don't have to act on it immediately.
Yeah.
But then when you're working with people, like, you've already asked them to do so much that they didn't see coming for them. So as soon as they write that name down, they're probably thinking, oh my goodness, is he about to have me call these people? Yeah. Like, they don't know it's not until you get to steps 8 and 9 and stuff that you got to start circling.
Well, that's the beauty of it though, right?
Yeah. I guess for some people it's terrifying.
Yeah.
So what about a lot of folks that I know, when they start into this fears and it asks you, what are you afraid of? What are your fears? And then it asks you this question of not just what are they, but why do you have them? And I don't think anybody had asked me that question before until the step 4 process, because at first you kind of want to think, and at least I did, like, I wanted to think, I'm not really afraid of much. But then it was like, am I afraid what other people think about me? Oh, Yeah, I forgot about that. Well, are you afraid of never being successful in life? Oh, dang,
Mm,
I forgot about that.
yeah.
Well, are you afraid that somehow the bottom's going to fall out and you're going to relapse again? Oh, I forgot about that. And when you ask yourself the question of why you had these things, it really brings you to this thorough review of what fear looks like in your life. And did you have any kind of experience with the fears inventory that led way into any perspective changes for you?
Well, I think once I was able to dive in to a lot of these situations, it gave me a confidence that that came out of nowhere, kind of really, because I was always afraid of sharing. Well, not afraid of, but not confident enough to share. Tell people about Christ or get up in front of a class and teach. This unlocked like a confidence I had to actually do that. And going through this and talking to people that I'm going into this situation knowing that this person's mad at me, and I have to get past that and do this. It kind of like, okay, well, if I can do this, I can do anything. Kind of perspective, and that's what it did for me, and that's why it's so good to go through these steps and have these experiences. And yeah, that's the biggest fear I had was going up to these people, and it unlocked a confidence that I didn't know I had in myself.
Wow. Yeah, and it talks about that when it says that we learned how to trust an infinite God
Mm-hmm.
rather than our finite selves. That maybe at one point in one moment in time, I was starting to actually build a confidence that wasn't built on me.
Yeah.
Because anything that's built on the self idea of confidence usually fell short. And I think the big book even articulates that some people once had great self confidence, but it never went far enough to solve the fear problem.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until you became comfortable with not knowing, but just believing that everything was going to be okay. That's hard work.
Yeah.
That's really hard work to not be able to see how things are going to pan out well, but just wake up every day and interact in a way that you have to know that they're going to be well.
Yeah. And that third step is that higher power. You're going to need it in the fourth step, and that's crazy how it was intended to happen. But yeah, that going in blind thing is, that's knowing God has your back. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, so now everyone's favorite topic is what we get into, and that's sex,
Mm,
the sexual inventory.
yeah.
And when you're talking about that inside of the big book, the way it's outlined, I think there's a lot of folks who actually get this wrong, the way that it was designed prospectively to kind of view into it. But the folks who talked about it inside of this part of the inventory said that we don't want to be the arbitrators of anybody's sex conduct. They said, they made this comment in the book. They said everyone has relationship issues, that we don't really want to speak to relationship issues directly.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the really crazy redirects that I think it makes is that it talks about, instead of focusing on a sexual inventory, it's ironic that they call it the sexual inventory, but instead of focusing on the sexual inventory, that instead we chose to review our own conduct over the past years. So in a sense, it says we're not going to treat your sexual relationships any differently than we are any relationships. And then instead, it asks this question about it. It says, when you're reviewing your own conduct over the years past, where have you been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? And then it asks this question, everyone's favorite question: whom have you hurt? Oh
Mm.
no.
Mm.
I know when when the question came off the top ropes for me and was like, okay, who have you caused harm to? Who have you hurt? You kind of gasp a little bit because you're like, what do you mean? Like, at this point in my life, when I'm doing this inventory, it's more like, who haven't I hurt?
Right.
Who haven't I caused harm to in that? Did it make you take pause when you knew that you were about to have to go into making a list of all of these people that you've hurt?
Yeah. I mean, especially a couple. There's a long list, but you always have those couple in your head that you just know, oh wow, this might be interesting. Let's see how this goes. Or that's why people back out of this thing so early, is because they don't want to face those fears and dive into it head first. And I hurt. I could think of what my ex-girlfriend. I was really selfish. And she knew nothing about really addiction. She was kind of just like, she didn't even know I was on drugs until like it became a problem.
Wow.
And that just talking to her after and talking to her about the situation, it was just like, wow, I don't even remember that. And but I'm sorry, and how can we move past this? And that was an experience I'll never forget.
Yeah, well, sure. And you see a lot of folks when they step into us and they're saying to themselves, okay, I've really tried to shape a new ideal. And this is what the big book calls it, that they're trying to really reframe the way that they approach relationships, and they're part of who they're supposed to be in any kind of relationship. So the whom they have hurt question goes into your parents, your siblings, the guy down the street at the grocery store, everybody that you would have caused some sort of harm to. And I mean, I remember making my list. I was a few pages in.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think my sponsor did really well was framing up this idea of allowing God to speak to me through the process. So he would say to me things like, I want you to go home. I want you to take your notebook. And then when you go into your notebook, I want you to start listing out every name that comes to mind. All right. And then he says, once you start drying out, like, once the first 20 names just flew out there,
right?
They already knew who they were, why they needed to be on the paper, all of that stuff. But then after that happened, you kind of start to dry out a little bit. Like you start to just have a name every few seconds or so. And then eventually a name every 30 seconds. He said, once you can't think of another name, I want you to stop. I want you to look at the list. I want you to ask God who's supposed to be on the list. I said, look at the list of names you created and say, God, who's missing from the list? Let God get the opportunity to speak to you. And then whoever God puts in your mind, you put them on the list. You make sure that they represent. But then he said, once the list is completed for this exercise, let it be completed. He said, there might be other people in the future that need to make their way to the list that you'll remember. And I have since then. I've remembered people that I've caused harm to that weren't at the forefront of my mind when I was making the list. And since then I've had to add them to other inventories that I've taken, on step 4 down the road.
Yep.
But when you do that, you're asking God to help you mold a new ideal for how you would interact with those folks and eventually the person that you'll become. So this is one of my favorite parts too about the big book. It says this, and this is kind of like a forthcoming experience here. After you make the list, it tells you what to do next. And I know it's going to sound weird, but it says, and I made you do this. I said, put it all down on paper and then just look at it.
Yeah.
And you're
I remember that. Yeah.
Oh my God. Remember I just said, now stop what you're doing and look at it. Look at the list. I never really understood why it had you like, no, I'm like, stop what you're doing. Read the list. Look at the list. It was shocking to look at the sum of my past wreckage.
Yeah.
And I think it was the first time that I had ever been honest about what kind of destruction and what kind of effects it had on people and the universe in general.
Right.
All of those people that I had harmed in a negative way, I had never seen them all in one place before. And it really took my breath away. Did you have any similar experiences?
Yeah, I just remember looking at the list and having to turn it. And that's when I realized, wow, what kind of person have I become? And all these people, how did I affect them, and are they still affected? And that kind of just made me like think about it, like, wow, there has to be some good and come from any of this, and I guess that's how you got to think about it. Like, some good has to come out of this, because look at all these names I have on this paper of people I affected, and I'm gonna try my best to make up for it, or not not them specifically, but
Right.
another person. And that's what I was thinking about. Like, I have to make up for this, not every individual, on the paper, but in some other way.
Wow. Yeah. To look at the list and then to automatically feel a responsibility.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I looked at it. I saw what I had done. And then I felt the weight of responsibility with it. So there's this context. You finished step 4. Since then, kind of evolving through your life, every day has had to have some version of a step 4. It's found in the retirement section. We honestly reviewed our day, right? It's asking you to take inventory of just your day for that day. How have you stayed in touch with keeping track to make sure your inventory, your stock and trade is still sellable as you travel through your recovered experience?
Yeah. So, some of the names on the list you see, those people you see every day, like your parents. So it's kind of just like thinking of, what can you do to make them more comfortable? I'm over their house. Maybe I don't spend that much time in the bathroom because I don't want them worrying, and I just don't want anything. It's going through.
You don't
life
get
like,
caught up scrolling in your phone.
Yeah,
Get your business done and get out.
I've been in here 3 minutes. My mom's probably going to be. Let's not make it 4. I don't want her to worry. Doing stuff like that and just being mine.
You're talking about avoiding the appearance of evil is what you're describing.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's
Yes.
a lot of people don't think of that. It's a very courteous way to start to live your life, to think, hey, I can just alleviate some of their concerns by making a few adjustments.
Right, exactly. And that's kind of like the stuff I kind of try to do. And, I haven't had a girlfriend since my other girlfriend, but, I'm sure I'll live that life in a different way too. But, just kind of just thinking about what you did and how to change it. And, because you're courteous of how they're thinking, and you're thinking of their feelings. So I think that's kind of stuck with me, and I try to do that moving forward. And yeah.
So if you were going to break out one story about step 4, maybe an experience that you had, or somehow how it's helped transform or even reshape, does anything come to mind quickly about how that process influenced you in a positive way, and how now you're probably leading a life from a new perspective because of the work that you did in step 4?
Yeah. I think well, not to mention I'm sponsoring other people right now.
Okay.
So going through the step with them, I mean, it's really cool because you kind of think about, okay, what did I think in this situation? What was I thinking? What could I help them with? And how can I make it better or easier for them? Not easier, because you definitely want them to have the full experience, but help them through this process. And it's really cool to get through that step and to help them, get through all the steps. And I've only been through all the steps once with another person, but it was a really cool experience, I remember.
Wow. So as someone's maybe looking to get into this process themselves, go ahead and help them preempt, but make sure they know it's going to be worth it. What's the value message that you would give to someone who's considering starting the 12 steps with someone and eventually getting to that step 4?
Yeah. Pick somebody that's going to hold you accountable, that you're not necessarily comfortable with. Well, be comfortable with them, but pick someone that's going to hold you accountable. And once you're at phase 4, don't quit. Get through it. You will get the reward at the end. Do not quit before you get the reward.
We appreciate you having a conversation, and I'll tell you what, privileged to sponsor you. Since I've been working with you, you've gotten better and better and better. I'll consider it a benchmark to my success too.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you sponsoring me.
I'm really proud of you, man. And the ministry is truly blessed to have you a part of it. So thank you for being a part, and thank you for having this this time to chat with us. We know you took time out of all of the kids that you got down the hallway. I know you got a lot of kids down there.
It's a privilege.
It's a privilege. All right. We love you guys. Thank you for joining us behind the Citgo. Today we had our friend Eric Machado. We were all things about step 4, talking about the difficulties, but also the great rewards around making a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. We will see you next time on Behind the Citgo.